Wow, thank you so much, Jerome. That was beautiful, so touching. I'm listening to the words, move in the direction of your dreams, and just this notion of, no matter what is going on and what despair and struggles that we might have to overcome in doing so, and just sitting with that here today as I share on the topic today, no one is against me. How can we apply that to living your dreams? Where are you right now as you take a little snapshot in this moment of like where you are with respect to your life purpose and your dreams? Just take a moment to consider that. A reporter was interviewing a man who was having his 100th birthday. And the reporter asked the man, "What are you most proud of?" And the man replied, "Right now, I don't have a single enemy in the world." And the reporter said, "Wow, that's amazing. That's really inspiring, actually." And the centenarian nodded and said, "Yep, I've outlived each and every one of them." So my question for you all today, for us all, is how do you handle opposition? Or, from a unity perspective, we might say apparent opposition, perceived opposition, or the experience that you're having in your life that someone or something is against you, is, in other words, an enemy of sorts. How do you default in handling that? Are you the type of person, when you encounter that kind of difficulty, or like a difficult person, are you the kind of person who fights, Put up your dukes, if you will. Duke. He's listening. That was for him as he's watching. Are you a fighter? Is your stance to argue back, to raise your voice in defense of yourself, in aggression toward the other person, to take them down and take their views down? When you encounter opposition, is your first default to fight? Or when you encounter conflict or opposition, is your default to withdraw, right? Kind of back up, look for the first exit, if you will, right? If people are yelling or fighting, is your response to withdraw back here? Possibly not even physically, but only in your own head. You pull in, you pull back. Maybe you might even go to certain substances or addictions to numb out. In the face of the challenges or conflicts that you experience in your life, maybe you decide, I'll flip on the television or put on my headphones, and zone out the condition. Maybe your first response in the face of opposition is to freeze. You might not be able to fight or flee, but instead you feel frozen in that moment. Someone's yelling at you, and you can't even speak up on behalf of yourself, right? To just freeze. Maybe some of you out there are jabberers, if you will. You don't actually address the issue squarely, right? There's tension and there's conflict. You don't address it squarely, but you will go jabber and talk about it with anyone who will listen to you about the issue. Talk to everyone but that person, right, with whom you directly have a conflict. Those are just several of the different ways in which we human beings manage, or in some ways don't manage, the conflict, the enemies, the problems that we face in our lives. If you, in thinking about conflict, have a sense that, I'm not very good at handling conflict. So for some of you, I can handle conflict at work, and that's fine, but when it's personal and it's at home, that's when I really shut down, or that's when I really get defensive, right? So it could be situational. But if you struggle to handle confrontation and conflict in your life, just know that you are not alone. As an attorney for 10 years, as well as a mediator, and as a minister now, I can tell you, as I talk to people like on a daily basis, that it feels like almost none of us have good skills in the area of conflict management, right? And even those of us who, like me, studied for years. I studied and trained to be a mediator. I know nonviolent communication and powerful non-defensive communication. Even those of us who've studied ways of handling conflict may really do it well when it's somebody else's, right? You can go and help when it's somebody else's issue. But when it's yours and it's personal, that can be problematic for you. So today, here in Unity, we call ourselves practical Christianity or practical spirituality. I want to explore with you this thing that we all face universally and talk about a spiritual approach to handling what we perceive as an enemy situation. And I put that enemy in quotes for a reason. So that enemy experience is universal to all of us. It's the experience of roadblocks, of people who seem to be out to get you or in your way. And this spiritual approach that I want to bring forth today was taught by many great masters, one of whom was Jesus himself, but definitely also other enlightened masters in Eastern as well as Western traditions. But speaking of Jesus, I want to share a story about a woman, a mom, who was making pancakes for her two little boys. One was Jimmy, the older boy, and one was Randy. So the mom's making pancakes, and the boys started fighting, quarreling over who was going to get the first pancake. So the mom thinks, Jesus. I'll bring up Jesus here. He's a good exemplar. I'm going to use this moment as a teaching moment and teach some morals to my children right now. So she says, boys, if Jesus were sitting here in this room, Jesus would say, let my brother have the first pancake, right? Jimmy, upon hearing this, his eyes open wide, and he turns to his brother Randy and he says, you be Jesus. That's kind of how we often are in conflict, right? You take the high road first. You do it, right? So I share that story in part because I want to bring up the idea again that here in Unity, we don't see Jesus as the great exception. Rather, we see Jesus as the great example. He's not someone to worship up there and out there, but instead really more like a big brother and a master teacher. And this comes from, as Sandra said, we'll be exploring in these next 3 weeks the 5 fundamental basic unity principles. And this comes from the first 2 principles. The very first unity principle is there is only one power and one presence active in the universe, God the good. One power, God the good, in all, through all, and over all of us. And so the second basic unity principle really just follows from the first. It's that this essence, this divinity, this innate goodness and wholeness is in you, is you, all of you, without exception. And so God being all that is expressed in, through, and as each and every one of us. And so when we talk about Jesus in the unity tradition, we don't often talk about, okay, what would Jesus the person do? Instead, it's more like, what would your indwelling Christ Spirit, the divine in you, do? First, you have to connect to that divinity, right? So we'll talk about that a little bit today. I want to share in 3 different points about this new method of being that was taught by Jesus, but that is not something only the saints can show up in doing. First, what I want to share is the importance of facing our challenges. You know, not necessarily, sometimes actually fighting is a way we don't face it. Getting angry and yelling is sometimes a way we don't squarely face it. But I'm going to invite you to consider today something in your life that seems like a challenge to the dreams that Jerome was singing about, that seems like it's an obstacle, a person or a situation. Consider that. And then second, I want to invite the idea, which is the title of today's talk, for you to consider applying to this issue, which is the idea, the spiritual principle, that in truth, despite all appearances to the contrary, that no one and nothing is against you and your good and your dreams and your blessing. That no one and nothing is against you. That's the second point. But third, I want to go back to this notion of the indwelling Christ. Because Jesus taught in Luke, the Gospel of Luke, about loving your enemies. And so I really want to bring this practice forth into the idea that we don't eliminate our enemies by outliving them. We eliminate them by loving them. And so that's the final point I want to share with you today. So I want to begin by really inviting you to dig deep into your present life experience and ask yourself, it might be at the forefront of your mind right now. What is going on in your life today that feels like an enemy presence? Is it someone in your life who seems to be like an unfair competitor? Maybe it's in the romance realm, someone you feel like you're kind of competing with them for getting the girl or getting the guy, if you will. Or maybe it's someone at work where you feel like you're the one who works the hardest. And they lie and they cheat and they manipulate the boss, and somehow they're getting more of the rewards than you. But they're doing it unfairly. And so you feel like this is unjustified. Or maybe it's an unfair treatment from an ex, from a family member, where you feel like, this person is blocking you from experiencing the peace, love, and joy that you want to be experiencing. Maybe the problem is you have an experience of someone just seeming to dislike you for no obvious reason. Like you never did anything to them. But you have this experience in your life of like, why is this person like always critiquing me? Why is it that you sit in this room and for some reason, all these ideas go about, but if the idea comes from you, that person shuts it down right away, just because it came from you. Like they have something personal against you. Consider that. Or no matter what you do, you just feel like this person always has something not nice to say about what happened, Or they will only reluctantly say the positive and they focus on the negative. I want you to consider whether, this perceived enemy is maybe someone, maybe not in your present life, but someone in the past who's hurt you. But the way that that person blocks you is you stay in your woundedness, right? It's someone who hurt you in the past, and you're like, but you've got this energy against that person, this tension. Or maybe it's someone who hurt someone you cherish or love. Or maybe it's someone or even a public figure that you're holding this energy of againstness as because they're hurting the vulnerable populations, whether it's children or minorities, people whom you care about, people whom you want to defend. So consider if that's the issue that might be alive for you here today. I know some of us have this idea, people say this a lot, I'm my worst enemy, right? To consider if maybe right now you're not thinking of actually anything outside of you, but there's actually a part of you that feels to you like, this is the thing keeping me from realizing my highest life and my biggest dreams and all the love that I want and all the prosperity that I want. And this thing is either like my body, like, why is my body in so much pain? Why do I have this physical condition? How come I don't have the energy that I used to? And it feels like it's a block against you. Or maybe it's more psychological, and you know this intellectually. You just can't figure out why. That every time something good happens for you, you self-sabotage. Something in you that just, wants to and make it not work. And you're aware, and you feel like, God, sometimes I am my own worst enemy. Or sometimes maybe you feel like it's your age. Either you're too young or you're too old for this job that you want, or for this person that you'd like to date, right? Or it's too late for you to create the kind of savings you want. Whatever the story is around this. Or maybe, I know I've shared about some of my issues with my husband here, all with his approval, but maybe it's someone you normally love in your life. But just for this week, this person is like your nemesis, right? Your enemy. And that reminds me of a story that I'm sure many of you heard before, but it's the wife and the husband are really at it, and they're having this big argument. And they're so upset at each other that they won't even talk to each other, right? So that this place where they're just, I want to talk to you, that kind of place. And the man realizes one night, I have to be up at 5 a.m. tomorrow morning for work. And so, as he's used to doing, he's like, well, I want to ask my wife to wake me up tomorrow morning at 5 a.m., but I don't want to talk to her. So he writes a note, will you please wake me up at 5 a.m. tomorrow morning for a work appointment? Next morning, he wakes up, jolts out of bed. It's 9 a.m., and he's missed his meeting. And he's furious. He's about to go and run over to his wife and complain when he sees, next to his bed, a note. It's 5 a.m. Wake up. Who among us hasn't done something like that at some point, So maybe your nemesis is someone close to you right now that you normally love, but right now it feels like an obstacle. Wake up. I love this story because it reminds me also, wake up. What does that mean here in Unity? To me, it means this idea that there are these universal truths, one power, one presence. And if I'm not seeing that, it's my job to wake up. It's my job to wake up to the reality that, spiritually speaking, at the very essence of things, in truth, no one and nothing is against me. And that leads to my second point, which is that if we are willing to look at, it's a perception thing, if we are willing to look at our situation differently, then the situation changes. Wayne Dyer, the famous Wayne Dyer, said, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So consider, in this situation of conflict, have you been looking at it like this is my enemy that I have to either conquer or run away from? Or are you willing to look at this very conflictual, tense, painful situation and consider that even in this, there is no one and nothing that is truly against my highest good? And that perhaps even take another step. Everything and everyone is for me. No one is against me, and everything and everyone is for me. Why? Because there's only one life, one love, one power. That doesn't move against itself. It's only unfolding. And so that which looks like an obstacle when perceived correctly is a very good detour into a better path. You've heard this saying too in relationship, rejection is God's protection, right? It's that idea that what looks like it's against us is for us. How might you see your situation differently? You don't have to make the decision of what to see. Just be willing to see it differently and let that indwelling spirit change that for you. Change your vision. Allow you to see the truth of the goodness of what is in here that is for you, the blessing that is here for you. I first encountered this teaching that no one and nothing is against me back in 2005 when I was at Unity in Marin in California. I was introduced to it by my own minister at the time. It was revolutionary to me at that time. But I was, for the first time in church, I had never joined a church before. This was like brand new to me. And there were some people where I felt like, they didn't like me and that they were against me, just a couple people. But it tormented me. And so I went to my minister and I asked him about how to deal with it because my original way is bail. I'm like, I'm out of here. I don't like this community. It's not perfect, And so I wanted to leave. He was like, hold on a second and read this book. And he introduced me to a book called The Eye of the Storm by Gary Simmons. It's a book about addressing conflict. And it is in that book that I first heard those words. And I thought, wow, what if I changed the way I approached my life? Not just this one circumstance, but my entire life. So that even when someone critiqued me in a way that I felt was unjust, even if someone told fake stories about me, even when it felt like someone was constantly feeling competitive with me, that this experience was here to teach me something. Gary Simmons, in his book, says that the people, the Hindus who taught him this, asked him, tell me about your past wife experiences. And Gary thought, oh, I know you don't speak English very well, but do you mean past life experiences? And he's like, I don't remember any past life experiences. And he said, no, your past wife experiences. And he had been married 2 or 3 times before. And so he stops and he realizes, oh, well, my past wife experiences helped me to learn that my wholeness is not outside of myself. And when I read this, I really resonated with that. Because a lot of times, this outer opposition that feels like it wants to take you down, I remember how much it used to affect me. And I won't say that it doesn't still affect me, but I would not be where I am today. I wouldn't be able to be in a public forum if I wasn't able to handle a certain amount of criticism, right? That I could not even bear. There's stuff like that that would devastate me back then as I applied this principle and came to understand that the gift in it for me was to come to really know who I really am. That's the gift. The gift for you might be to learn to assert yourself. That bully is there so that really you need to learn to speak up. And that's the gift of the situation. That's for you. And you learning that is going to help take you to the next stage of realizing your dreams, right? And so Gary, a quote from his book, "No one is against you. You have no adversary in your life. There is nothing in the universe that is against you or your purpose. Any experience that you have to the contrary is evidence that your mind is rooted in separation and illusion. If you resist what seems to resist you, you strengthen the hypnotism that keeps you in bondage to your past and makes predictable your future. No one is against you. And so that leads to my final point for today, which is that the ultimate way that we can, as a spiritual practice, not only lay hold of this idea that no one and nothing is against me, but really integrate it into our being so that our life experience becomes more fully of that, where more and more we experience people and everyone in life, the universe, being for us, is that we align ourselves with the energy of oneness and love. And Jesus taught specifically how to do this in the Gospel of Luke, when he says, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. It doesn't say go back to relationship with those who abuse you, but send them love. Send them love, because it is that energy of love that enables you to come and realign with the knowing of the essential Christ nature in everyone. And when that happens and you're aligned, the flow of the universe becomes deeply prosperous. You know, this week was a phenomenal week for me. Not that anything in particular happened, but as I was sitting with this material, I had this like really precious moment of, wow, you know what? Standing here in this moment today, I can say that I am happier than I've ever been in my entire life. I mean, I felt this week, I just sat there with my life. I remember feeling like there was like this flood, like an ocean of love. And I was telling my friend, I'm like, I need to figure out how to surf, you know? Like it was just so much, but it was like joy and love overflowing. And I've been doing this practice for the last, 14 years. You know, it's not like an overnight thing, but I realized that even when I have an initial, oh, that hurt, that sucked, I return to this principle, no one is nothing, and nothing is against you, Nhien. If you can wake up to that, then you know the good that is here present for you. But part of the practice isn't just claiming it for myself, it's claiming this truth for others. And so that's what leads to this next story, which is the story I'll close with today. I love the story. It was published in Newsweek magazine a number of years ago. A story about doing good to your perceived enemies. It was a memorial service that they were reporting on that was held for the former Vice President Hubert Humphrey. So at the time, of course, you know, he's a vice president. Hundreds of people came from around the world to this memorial service. But there was one person who came, whom everyone else snubbed, ignored. They wouldn't even look at him, much less talk to him. And so there he stayed sort of against the wall on a corner of the room until President Jimmy Carter walked into the room. And when he came into the room, the first thing he did was approach this man. And the man's name was Richard Nixon. And he walked over to Nixon. And he shook his hand. And he said, "Welcome home, Mr. President. Welcome home." And he embraced him. Commenting on that story, Newsweek magazine asserted, if there was a turning point in Nixon's long ordeal in the wilderness, it was that moment, that gesture of love and compassion for a man who was considered at the time the enemy of the people. So, as I close our time together today and prepare for a time of meditation, I simply want to reiterate the invitation that life can flow and be immensely joy-filled if only we would be willing to really squarely face the conflict or trouble we have in our lives, to look at it and to be willing to open to the perception of this deeper truth that even in this situation, no one and nothing is truly against me, that in fact, all of life is for me, and that I can come to know this more deeply when I start to be for all of life, for all people. To let go of my judgments of deservedness and lack of deservedness and be part of the flow of love, peace, and abundance in the world. So with that thought, I invite us to take time now to prepare for a time of meditation.